Good morning, everybody. Welcome to TLD Cast, and welcome to this morning's playlist. We've got the data measurement and analytics playlist with our guest, Sam Rogers, longtime supporter of Sam Rogers. So glad that he's opening this particular event up for us. This is such an important conversation that we're having, and I'm thrilled that Sam is participating. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Luis, and good morning, all my TLDC friends and family.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.
So if you guys don't know Sam, and most of you I'm sure already do, and we have about 12 people. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's popping up. Jane is in the room. Kara, Laura Middlesworth, Annika,
Yay.
David, Tamara, Mark, Christopher Yellen, Bethany, Dominic, Anderson, Emil. Hey, good morning, Mark. You guys, Mark, you definitely know Sam because Mark, you've been here from the beginning too. But let me read a little bit of his bio so you guys know Sam bridges the gap between technology design, subject matter expertise, and audience engagement. He's the principal consultant at Snaps. He's worked for learning consultant. He's worked as a learning consultant for clients such as Google, Capital One, Deloitte, AAA, Del Monte, and lots more. I know that he was like a YouTube star. Well, not a YouTube celebrity, but built a ton of trading for YouTube. LMS integration specialist. You've kind of done you're like a full stack L&D person. That's like when I think about that sort of terminology, Sam Rogers pops to the top of my head.
Well, good. Thank you. I tried to use that as a branding term like 8 years ago, and it fell very flat.
Yeah, well, it is kind of confusing. Like on the software side and the system operations side, everyone knows what full stack is. But I think in the L&D world, it probably doesn't quite work, which makes it perfect for you to kind of be in this position where you're talking about data analytics and measurement, because you've kind of seen a little bit of everything, and you absolutely know the importance of what we're talking about today. And, like I had mentioned before, Sam and I, when I told him kind of about this topic, I'd also mentioned that I thought it was important to do this for October because it's kind of Halloween month, and a lot of people are probably scared about this conversation. But it's actually one of the most it could just incredibly free you up if you get a handle on some of this stuff. It'll just make your life so much easier. And so with that said, let's move on. And Sam, thank you again. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize my screen. I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Luis. And I see a comment here from Jane. Jane did this great thing yesterday that you might be inspired to copy as well. She was tweeting out the link to this thing just to say, hey, there's going to be this great conversation. It's the first of our playlist on data measurement and analytics. You might just want to click the little button. You probably know how it works. It's in the upper right-hand part of the screen. And yeah, thanks for being with us, Jane, and thanks for tweeting that out. And sharing screen. Data. It doesn't have to be scary. Don't worry. All right. So as part of this playlist, there will be several other speakers who will go further in depth than I will in this hour. I can geek out with you on the real deep analytics stuff. I helped, as Luis was mentioning, working for YouTube. I helped create the digital management curricula, the courses for YouTube, diving deep into YouTube analytics and the API. I've done a lot of analytics work, high-end reporting and stuff like within Cornerstone, or creating custom reports in whatever LMS you name, as well as really trying to figure out what is the data that actually matters to the business, not just the stuff that is the learning analytics version of it, but the stuff that really makes a difference. And you've probably all, seen or had to fill out your little smile sheets and all of that. We'll talk just a little bit about this, but really the next generation of these kinds of feedback forms, how we can use data to be more accountable to the businesses that we serve, to the learners that we serve, how we can use things that we are making to be able to count the things that count better, to be able to improve what it is that we're making. And so this is what we'll be looking at here today over the next hour. What is it actually for? And this is something that is really important. This is what keeps it from getting too scary. Anything that tells you something more than you know right now is probably useful. It's probably useful in telling a story to the business about what it is that you're creating. It's probably useful in making a next iteration or improvement to the quality of the content that you're making. It's probably useful to know what those things are that learners actually care about, what those things are that stakeholders, sponsors actually care about, and what's worth it and what's not in order to measure things. So we'll get up to speed on some of the common methodologies. I'll just talk about like 10 of them that you should probably be familiar with as an overview, and then get into some numbers that you can gather from the organization that you work with that you can use to help build a business case, to talk in ways that the business stakeholders that you want to reach, that are going to pull the plug on your project if it doesn't work well, or who are going to say, yeah, that didn't work so well last time, so you get less budget this time. You want to avoid conversations like that. Data is what helps you do it, because you can shift that conversation to, look how much we did without being well resourced. We didn't have enough people. We didn't have enough money. Look how much difference we made. How about we start talking about more people and more money? When you have that data, now you're eligible for that conversation. So we'll talk about gaining trust outside of L&D and in the rest of the business as well. So Luis gave a little bit of an intro. You've seen me around. Hopefully I see a lot of familiar faces here. I do lots of things, lots of places, including writing. And if you haven't been reading the stuff I'm writing on Medium or LinkedIn, or I've done a bunch of YouTube stuff lately, Twitter, I'm around talking about data and stuff. Previously, I've been known more as like a video guy, although I was part of the digital marketing playlist and contributing to that. But data is really what I'm focusing on these days. Not in a hard statistics math way, but in a values forward kind of way. So there's no hard math in this session today, but there are some tough choices. And I hope that we can dive into those. And please do not feel compelled when we start talking about data to count everything, all the things. We don't need to count all the things. Like, there is a role for statistics and math to be able to infer how we are making decisions based on data is what we want to focus on. So where is it that you want to go with data? This is a question to ask yourself. This is a question to ask around in the department that you work for, the outside of the department that you work for, with other folks. Where are we headed as an organization? Because if you don't know what to count, then it doesn't really matter what you count. Yeah, let's count the easy things. Let's count the things that don't really matter. Let's have some more smile sheets. What do you say? Because it doesn't really matter anyway, right? That's part of how we ended up in the situation that we've been in learning and development, where we're not really as often as we'd like, probably, treated as equal players in the organizational discussion. There's a reason for that. It's because we don't know the right language, and we're not coming to the table with the right data oftentimes to be able to do that. So by way of example, using data to decide, back in ancient history, when science and the government got along, they put things like this together. Using data to decide, how do we approve this drug? Let's say that's a mission for this company, working for a pharmaceutical company. We need to go through the process of developing a new product. What data are we going to use along the way? How are we going to incorporate that? It's very clear what the outcome is. The outcome, in the case of this FDA slide here, it's either approval or disapproval. That's the target. As soon as we've reached that target, we no longer need to continue measuring in the same manner. We've gotten to decision. Done. You've probably seen me share this slide if you've seen any of my stuff before, because I use it, I think, in every presentation. The minimum effective dose. If you're taking some of that medication for a condition that a doctor said that you have, and he said, take 2 of these, don't take the whole bottle. Don't take 1. You need just enough to create the result that you need, but not so much that it's wasteful, that it's harmful. So when you're thinking of measurement, you need just enough to get to the decision that needs to be made, but not so much that you eat up all the budget doing the measurement. That hurts the organization. Not so little that it's beneath something that's actually valuable to that decision, that's actually engaging for that audience. So what are you measuring for? There's basically just a couple kinds of metrics for L&D: activity, results, efficiency. These are the kinds of metrics that we're working with. So I'd love to know from you in the chat here, what are you tracking right now? Just start throwing some things in the chat of stuff that you have measured for training programs that are under development, so that you know that they're ready for an audience. Things that have rolled out previously, so that we know that this training program was successful, or that this video I made was successful, or this micro-learning intervention was successful, or this active facilitated workshop was successful. What is it that you are tracking now, or that you have tracked in the past, to help know if it worked, or help decide if it's ready to scale? And anything that that you care to contribute here in the chat is most welcome. Also, while we're talking about chat stuff, thanks everyone for chatting things back and forth. If you have any questions, if you type a question mark, probably Crowdcast will pick it up. But just in case they don't, there is that Ask a Question feature. Please use the Ask a Question feature to, guess what? Ask questions. Keep that stuff coming, because I would love to take all those twists and turns with you based on where you're at, and serving what your questions are. So, question from, well, is that a question? Oh, what's being measured, from Adam Weisblatt. Hello, Adam. Reach, what percentage of managers in company have accessed the manager training? Great. So that's a utilization kind of metric. We made this thing. It's for these people. Do they know? Did they care? Did they even go in? Things like this absolutely are great measures. If that's like an awareness kind of level of measure, or prioritization. Managers have a busy workload. Maybe they know it's there. They just don't have time to do it because they're too busy managing, or probably in meetings. Okay, level 1 to 4 stuff. Graduation rate, key metrics, post-training completions for starters. Thank you, Christopher. Alan's chiming in with attendance. Okay. Audience reaction, usefulness in the classroom. Great. Productivity enhancement. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we're going for. And by the end of the session, we'll look at some of those productivity measures and how to get to them. Net Promoter Score. Okay. We'll talk definitely about Net Promoter Score, which is an external measure for client loyalty, customer loyalty. But there's also an eNPS score that we'll talk about. And discovery, top searches. Great. What are people looking for when they're looking to learn something? Maybe you've got everything that they're looking for, but if you don't have those right keywords that are going to come in search, if you're describing it in the way that makes sense to you, who is structuring the information, and not to the learner who is looking for the information, they won't find it. This is great stuff to track. Nice job. So there's some assumptions that we've got in there. Like in that search example, we're assuming that if we made content, that people know that it's there, that it can be found. We're assuming that when we make that manager training, managers will care, and they'll care enough to take time on top of their busy management schedule to actually schedule taking the manager training. The more that we measure things, the more we can test against these kinds of assumptions. Maybe it's true. How would we know? How can we find out? So jumping on to, is it worth measuring? So in the management example, it's worth measuring if managers took a manager training, because you can't measure how effective the manager training is if nobody took the training at all. I'm assuming that training exists for a reason. I'm assuming that there's something that's a benefit that they're going to get out of it. So you may be familiar with this, is often called the Eisenhower matrix from President, or back when he was a General Eisenhower. What are the things that are worth measuring? We can measure lots of stuff, but what are the things that we're actually going to care about? So I would urge you to aim for, guess what? That upper right quadrant. Anytime you see one of those 2x2 matrices, it's always the upper right quadrant you want to be in. Consultant trick. So if we start with just looking at the things that are not urgent, but that are very important, these are the things that the organization is generally kind of flying blind with. People won't prioritize this stuff really well because it's not urgent. There's urgent stuff to do, right? Data, measurement, analytics helps us make the case for the stuff like this that will tank the organization if nobody looks at it. The stuff that is important, the stuff we need to be paying attention to. But there's other stuff that we've got to, shuffle from here to there. There's other crises that come up. This is the most bang for your buck when it comes to measurement. And again, going back to, why it is that we're measuring all this stuff. Remember, we're just trying to calculate enough to make a decision about the continuation of a program, the scaling of a program, the effectiveness of a program, not so we can judge what happened before, but so that we can know what to do next. So we can see, this is working, let's do more. That's not working, let's change something. Or if you're not tracking anything, we need to make budget cuts. Let's look for the things that don't matter, i.e. things without data, and get rid of them. What are the odds that might happen? Every couple years, it cycles around. It's been about, 10 or so, but it'll happen again probably within the next year or two. The odds are that there's these cycles that business goes through, which is why you want to gather your data now. And as you're gathering data, please remember, do not overplay your hand. That is, don't spend so much time and effort and money gathering information that you get to the point at which the decision could be made and then keep going. That is waste. That is not needed. What you need is data to decide something. The closer you can get to what that decision is and who that decider is, the more accurately you can gauge how much measurement is going to be needed. And there's a lot of different ways to measure. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And as this slide is implying, yes, you can cheat. Actually, a lot of measures often get challenged. And this is another resistance that I think in L&D that we often have. We can challenge the validity of it. And yeah, like NPS score was brought up, Net Promoter Score. There's a lot of legitimate challenge around that. What is the value of it? Well, my position on that is, if you don't have something better to offer, shut up. You don't get to have an opinion because you don't have a replacement for the problem. The business needs something to track, and they've got something bad right now. But you can't, like the style sheets. We all know they're not great. The smile sheets are not really going to help stuff, but we don't have something better to replace it with, then we can't really talk about getting rid of it. We need to talk about what's going to matter more, and that varies from organization to organization. Razor focus in on that and then say something. So let's look at some of the things, the origins of those smile sheets. The story so far with all of the kinds of methodologies that are commonly used and some of the less commonly used ones in learning and development specifically. It's good if people like stuff, right? We made this thing, people like it. Yeah, well, great. We're not in the like business. We're in the learn business, right? If we just want people to like us, learning and development is probably not the greatest place to be. You know that there's going to be some change that you get to deal with in learning and development. And change isn't something that people necessarily like. They might like the results of that change, but the act of changing, especially the act of being changed when you didn't say that that's what you want to do, doesn't necessarily feel good, right? So like can actually be a contraindicator. I posted something on LinkedIn last week asking for silly metrics that people had actually seen to use. And one was like a likability scale of, how well you liked this training, how much you're sharing it with people, all those kinds of things. It's not a popularity contest. It's a change contest. We in learning and development are the ones that are basically left with resolving that tension between where the organization says it wants to go and where the organization is right now. We're the ones that help bridge that gap. So that doesn't always feel good. And it's not bad to ask people if they liked something. You can still get good information from it, but it's not all the information that you need, right? So top 3 common training evaluations. I've filled in the third one for you. Let's throw some stuff in the chat here. What do you got? For number 1 and number 2, most common training evaluations. I haven't heard either of these two things mentioned in the chat yet. We need to get them in there. So success case method, I'll mention, is the third one. It's not quite as common, and it made the rounds about 10 years ago. But Robert Brinkerhoff's method, we'll speak about a little more in just a second. That's probably, I think the most recent stat I saw was like 12 or 15%, something like that, of organizations use that. But the other two are the big ones that like almost everybody does. Smile sheets, yes. Smile sheets come from a guy in 1950, what was it, 4? I'm just trying to, gauge where we're at here. What will you do differently after taking the course? Okay, yes. The doing thing. Okay, test results. That's true. One of the things about test results is that they are measuring a single point, right? You're measuring at the end of when someone has taken a training. That's a data point. That's a thing. If you want to show change, one data point will never do it. One data point doesn't show change. You need at least 2 data points to show a change, because it used to be this and then it was this. You can't just show it's this. Where's the change? That shows a status, but it doesn't show a change. So moving on to fill in these blanks, we have Kirkpatrick's 4 levels. Yes. And the Jack Phillips version, which is ROI, including that as a 5th level, and there's also a level 0. These are the things that probably you're going to see. This is the smile sheets that we were referring to. And it comes from a while back, like, 60, 70 years ago, when there wasn't anything else to measure. This made a lot of sense. When there wasn't anyone else advocating for even evaluating a training program, this made a lot of sense. This was a step in the right direction. And as you may recognize, a computer in the 1950s, could easily take up the size of this room and do less than my phone. So we've evolved a little bit since then. But yeah, 4 levels, just to describe them if you're not intimately familiar with Kirkpatrick. You've got the reactions of the smile sheet things. You've got the actual knowledge, skills, how it is that we're doing on those tests, some kind of assignment or something that people are being given as a part of their training, assessing that. The behavior, which Adam was just measuring, what do you do differently after taking the course? So if there's any kind of on-the-job evaluation, other kinds of, task-related surveys, inspections, those kind of things. And then the level 4 business results of trying to get to the point where we're talking about the business objectives and measuring against that. This was further improved and elaborated upon by Jack Phillips. And you may be familiar with Jack and Patty Phillips. You'll see them doing stuff, lots of other webinars on the through their ROI Institute and all of that, bringing in return on investment, ROI, and providing some measures so that we can attach dollar signs to all those things that the Kirkpatrick levels had been associated with. And in order to do that, you've got another level, which is that, did it get a financial return? And you may have seen a graphic such as this, which is kind of the hybrid model between the two. Oftentimes people say Kirkpatrick, but they're actually talking about more of this ROI thing. They're very, very similar. They're basically, as I see it, largely iterations of the same idea. So did this pay off? Did it impact learning? Are people able to do it? Did people even learn it? So back to that manager's example of, did the managers take the manager training? Great, they took it, but did they get anything out of it? That would be that level. These are important things to know. And did the learners like it? Which, again, it's relevant information for certain questions. It's not bad to ask. It's just bad if that's all you ask. So success case method. This is kind of building on that previous kind of levels methodology, but it inverts it to focus on what is it that we want to create? How do we know when it works really well? Let's focus on that. Let's design for that. Let's find that where it exists and then help spread it. So we want to take our success case of someone actually learned something and they applied it on the job, and there was a business change that we could measure. Let's look at what that is, focus on that, and then back into all of those other questions. So you build an impact model, and you work backwards from what that business objective is, what that business goal is. If you're working with KPIs or OKRs or any of those other ways of setting business goals that are like the SMART kind, the ones that you can actually measure. What are the results that we need to create to make this goal? Okay. What are the behaviors that we need to create to make this result? What are the things that create those behaviors? I know, let's make some training that helps create these behaviors, that creates these results, that then creates these impacts. So it's based on the idea that you probably had this experience. If you look at how a training was evaluated, you'll generally see some kind of bell curve of these people got a lot out of it. These people, yeah, they did okay. And those people weren't really paying attention. They didn't really get much out of it at all. Success groups and take that first slice of the bell curve and help distribute those results to the other parts of the bell curve. And it integrates fairly well with that existing kind of hierarchy model of the Kirkpatricks, of the Phillips, to be able to take what the business is probably familiar with. They've probably seen or heard before. They probably know like what the smile sheets are and how to use them. It's not as far of a leap for your business to make to be able to start counting things in a different way, to start providing value through that method. So those are the 3 most common ones. And that takes up 90, 95% That's not a real statistic. That's one I made up. But it takes up the vast majority of measurement that's happening within L&D in the organizations that we serve. But there's some other ones that are also worth looking at depending on what it is you want to measure. We've got the LTEM model. We've got the Trainer's Balance Scorecard model. There's other things coming from the performance world, ISPI's kind of angle, which is all about performance above all. There's predictive learning analytics and Net Promoter Score, which was mentioned. We'll get to that. And there's some other stuff that's borrowing from other parts of the business that answer different kinds of questions. So let's dive in just a little bit, brief overview of some of these. Will Thalheimer, we have had on TLDC in the past. Love it every time he comes on. Brilliant guy. And just within the last year, he has released this learning transfer evaluation model. And what this is really good for is answering the kinds of questions that have to do with competency, specifically task competency. If you want to measure learning, that's one thing. If you want to measure the application of it, the transfer of it, that's why it's the T in LTEM, the learning transfer evaluation, then I highly recommend you check out Will Thalheimer's LTEM model. Then there's also the balanced scorecard. This is something that's borrowing from balanced scorecards in general that your business may be familiar with. If they're using balanced scorecards in other parts of the business to help align strategy with the actions taken to achieve that, again, the key performance indicators, KPIs, objective key results, OKRs, if you're doing this kind of thing already in other parts of the business and you're using that scorecard model, the Trainer's Balance Scorecard is a great way to go. Ajay Pankakar also was an early supporter of TLDC. You might recognize his face. And he wrote the book on this, adapting it to the L&D world. I mentioned ISPI and their approach towards performance measures above learning measures. Performance-based acceleration, customer stakeholder-driven training and development. This one was a little long to put on the whole slide, so I just used the abbreviation. But that's Guy Wallace's version of it. He's been around for many years and really provided a lot of value, kind of pre-internet value. I wish more people on the internet knew about the kind of stuff that he's been doing for 40 years. But if you're looking specifically at performance measures, there are models, there are ways of measuring that you might want to check out and check out what Guy has to offer. Predictive learning analytics. This is something we hear more about these days. This is another Phillips, not Jack, but Ken, who has the predictive learning analytics method, or the PLAY method. He's also done a lot of work with Trish Ewell. Trish is been a champion of his, and they've collaborated on some other stuff that hasn't quite come out yet about predictive learning analytics. Trish, a familiar face to our TLDC audience, and provided one of the keynotes at TLDC 19 earlier this year. If you're looking to be able to predict based on not just the training content that you're making, but also other factors, those first three models, well, especially the first two of like the Kirkpatrick and the ROI thing, it's really good at evaluating training when it's isolated from all other factors. But when does that happen? Does that really happen in the real world? If you can provide that isolation, great. They're great methods to use, but it's hard to do. So if you want to be able to provide the kind of real world relevance of your data that's not just learning and development all by itself, but that's actually taking into account all sorts of other things, then that's when some of these other methods really start to shine. including the predictive learning analytics method. Net Promoter Score was mentioned. So the guys that at Bain Capital who, or Bain and Company or whatever it is, the Bain folks, created this NPS score a while back. The guys that put this together also, from the outset, had not only an external customer score in mind, but an internal employee score in mind. If your business is doing a lot of stuff with NPS scores, you should really check out eNPS because it will make sense to the business already. So, great example of this, Apple was really aggressively using NPS in their Apple stores and in all of their Apple offerings. And they wanted to use that same kind of measure. It's a different measure, but it's a similar kind of approach for all of the people working in the Apple stores. They wanted to use it to help evaluate the employees themselves. So if you've seen things like this, where how likely are you to recommend this as a place to work? What's going on here is an NPS score, an employee net promoter score, where the measurement is, are you promoting? Are you just kind of passive? Or are you a detractor? And it's one of those things that's kind of like, it's not quite to the same degree, but it's kind of like Myers-Briggs or something like that, where there's not like a whole lot, there's a whole lot of work around it. There's not necessarily a whole lot of hard science around it, but some measure is better than no measure. What you're trying to engage is, how engaged is this employee? This is all about measuring that employee engagement, that employee loyalty. If you've got high turnover rates, a big attrition going on in your organization, and it's got people's attention, this is a great thing to pay attention to. And it is worthwhile. And so basically how the NPS score thing works, you're looking for a score that's positive, a score that's good. Is anything that's like around 30 or so is a good score. If you can get to like a 50 or 60, you're doing great. Like nobody gets to 100. That doesn't happen. So in order to calibrate this, like think of aiming towards like 30 or 40. If you've never done it before, you probably won't get there on your first try, but you can get there over time. And speaking of calibration, one of my favorite methods to use, I've never had a project where I got to use it fully and explicitly because it just was more measurement than was needed, overplaying the hand, but at least coming from the spirit of applied information economics. The guy who wrote the book, How to Measure Anything, Douglas Hubbard, I'm a huge fanboy of, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing. But this is all about determining what that decision is that needs to get made. And how is it that we can model, like with the success case, we're modeling that success. What does that look like? Here, we're modeling, what does our uncertainty look like? What don't we know? What, if we knew, would be just enough to decide? How could we know that? Now let's calibrate what it is that we're measuring against just reducing uncertainty, against knowing a little more than we know now. In the cheapest, fastest, simplest, easiest way possible, how can we know just enough to make the decision that we're going to need to decide? And that's where the information that you're gathering has the most value. That what is the least we can do for the most result? If that kind of thing appeals to you, then definitely check out How to Measure Anything. And this is used a lot, especially in risk. It does a lot of stuff to do with cybersecurity, risk assessments, any kind of legal impacts, any kind of disaster preparedness kind of stuff. So if you're working with compliance training and that's driving a lot of what you're doing, this is a great thing to use because it'll help you optimize for that. So I've just covered a bunch of different things. What is your focus? If you're looking for something that people will be familiar with and you want to apply a known methodology, I would highly recommend that you get that Kirkpatrick ROI stuff down, that you get that covered. It doesn't need to be the only thing that you measure, but it should be something that is there if someone asks, and it can give you good information. But it's basically kind of an old methodology that's being drug into the future. It probably won't serve your needs years from now, not as well. If you're interested in going by groups of learners and audiences, then Success Case is right up your alley. If you're looking more at competency of tasks, choose LTEM. There's not a lot of people who have like put out the case studies on this because it's pretty new, but it's also pretty awesome. So if you can be one of the folks leading case studies like that, please reach out to Will Thalheimer himself, and I'm sure he would be happy to give you a pointer or two and be interested in what it is that you're doing. The performance measures, that's been done for a long time. And when performance is the thing that you need to measure, then definitely check out the PACT model. And if you're using balanced scorecards, if you're using OKRs and KPIs and all of that, check out what Ajay's got. For future outcomes, if people are really looking at the learning analytics from like that AI point of view, if that's the machine learning is stuff that people are talking about more than the human learning, you might want to check out something that's based in that kind of idea, like the PLA method. And if it's all about loyalty, if it's about learner engagement, you're trying to like get the employees who are just not into it at work to be more into it at work. Measuring things like eNPS have real value, and your organization will understand what you're doing. And if you're looking at things like risk, check out applied information economics. So of all of the things that I'm mentioning as like something to focus on, I hope you realize they're not exclusive. You don't just pick one and that's all you do. You might do this across the board, this for that particular program, this for that one odd case where we're not really sure where we're going to go with it. Like, and they might even overlap. We're doing this because it's for all training, and because it's an ILT, we're applying this, and it's got this blended component, so we're going to apply that. You want to be careful about oversaturating your learners with evaluations, and especially evaluation questions and all of that. One of the good things about NPS and that model is it's basically one question, and that's it. So you might have some other capture for the qualitative data of things that people have to share, but it's essentially really easy to answer. And because it's easy to answer, you get a lot of answers. When we make it hard to answer, when it's like a 10 question thing that's multiple choice here and Likert there and fill in the blank here, like how many people are going to do that? It's not the number of people that probably is your target audience. So be aware of that learner friction when it comes to evaluation. The more transparent we can make this to learners, the better. But hopefully, this has been helpful in providing some kind of idea of what the landscape is out there for measurement in learning and development. I see a question here from Mark. Is there any level of question in your decisions, the data, whatever it is, you have at least a point of beginning defining approaches? I always start with the assumption that everything is perfect. Everything is working perfectly. There are no problems in this organization. And people then say, well, what are you talking about, dude? Like, you're here because that's not the case. If it was perfect, we wouldn't need you to train anybody. Oh, well, what's not working? And then it opens up. Then we can focus on what are the important things that people are voicing. And we'll get to in just a minute, engaging stakeholders and answering that question a little better for you, Mark. So anything that inspires you here to focus on what it is that your organization needs, please throw that in the chat if you don't mind. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, I know there's a lot of people out there who work very hard on their CPLP. or are working on it now, we should at least mention the ATD Learning Project Evaluation model. I do not have my CPLP, by the way, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on anything. But this is basically my notes, my assessment. If you want to check out getting your CPLP, then there's a link there at the bottom, ATD and stuff. So there is this isn't exactly agnostic, but it's not exactly any other methodology either. An approach that ATD discusses in their competency model to be able to evaluate a learning project. And there's a lot of great stuff here. If you're at a large scale organization where you can afford to do this and you can take that proper academic approach. Thanks for throwing it in the chat there. And the books there too. Awesome. If you can afford to do this, if you got the leeway and the buy-in from stakeholders to be able to take this approach, this is a more proper and exhaustive approach to how it is that you evaluate a project from its inception of, kind of to Mark's question of from the beginning, how do we define what approach is going to work? There is a methodology. Check out ATD. They have a lot of free resources as well. You don't have to spend a bunch of money getting this certification. But there is a methodology to work through it. However, personally, for me, I boil it down to one question. Can you pull the plug on this project? That's the first question I go in with anytime people start giving me feedback about a program that needs to be created, a program that is being created, is underway, and we're getting some feedback from stakeholders about it. So it's a pretty simple question to answer. If someone doesn't know the answer, then the answer is no, they're not able to. Or sometimes they'll just flat out say, oh, well, no. In that case, the response is, I look forward to getting you the results as soon as we're finished. What is it that I need to be aware of while we're doing this evaluation, while we're making this decision, while we're creating this training? What is it that I need to be aware of? They're expressing a concern, but it's like, take it under advisement. It doesn't mean anything. It's an opinion. It's not one that you need to use to drive your method or to shape the results that you're creating. It's just fine to do it all behind the curtain and let them know when you've finished. And to gauge what it is that they want to see when you're finished, but don't show them the result, because it will be a very big mess. Just trust me on that one. It will not go well. But there's an alternate answer to this question, which is yes. So when you get a yes to a question like this, now you know you're talking to the right person. So great question to ask here is, what results do you need to see before we have results? What do you need to see so that you, person who can pull the plug on this, what do you need to see so that you don't pull the plug? Because there's some decisions that will probably be made along the way. They might not just be patient enough to wait for you to go through that whole, ATD competency or learning project evaluation model. They're going to want to see something along the way. So what is it that they need to see before you have those final results? And that's kind of a defensive maneuver. Always counter that and leave them thinking about, what could I show you that would make you want to double down on what it is that we're measuring here? On this training program, this is framing it in terms of success in that stakeholder's mind. What is it that they need to see to go all in? All right, this is great. Let's have that as part of the results we're looking to generate. This will help shape that success case, regardless of what method you're using. And now let's see, what do we got? 15 minutes here. About that. 10. 9. Okay. Now let's go through a few of these numbers that you'll likely need along the way. If any of these things look familiar to other business all hands meetings that you've been on or something like that, if you've heard CSAT before, if someone's talking about a customer effort score, pay attention. Whatever it is that they're talking about is a way that they're measuring customer service. How it is that your company is, and this works for B2B companies as well, how is it that they are measuring their service or product? What is it that they're using? They are using something. If you've got like probably, I don't think you get away with not having something if you had like more than 40 or 50 employees. There is some measure somewhere that they're using for customer service, that they're using for customers. So pay attention. You want to speak in that language, the one that they're already talking. You don't need to go and teach them a new language of new metrics that make sense to you in learning and development. You want to talk to them in their native fluency because it's just going to make more sense. You're the one who's in learning and development. Go learn what they know. Go learn their language. So whatever that customer service number used to be, you want to know that too. Not just what it is now and what that metric is, but what it used to be. What's the history? How did we get here? There's some story going on. You're coming in the middle of it. Wouldn't it be nice to play into that and shape that narrative? You can't shape the narrative if you don't know what it is. So talk with people who are in customer service in your company. I know, I said it. Talk with other people outside of learning and development. Yes, really. So even if you're in academia, talk with people who are at the front lines of admissions, at the front lines of the business that you are in. How does training create value? Ask the leadership in your organization, how do we do that? Get their answers. This might not be like a formal business meeting. This might be a, hey, in the hallway or over coffee or lunch. Talk to the IT department, talk to other people and find out, how could we get a better return on investments in our training? Ask someone in leadership in HR. Ask someone in the leadership of ops. Ask your IT guy. Hey, we have all this training that's, for new programs and software. We just made this Workday transition, Salesforce transition. How could we get more value out of this? They will have opinions. They will have things to tell you. Just make sure you're asking as high up as you can go, because those are the voices that matter most. And once you get that, now you can start to ask more specific questions. These are numbers that you can get if you ask for them. I guarantee you, no one will give them to you if you do not ask. This is not the kind of stuff where people think, oh yeah, our customer life expectancy, we need to go tell L&D all about this. Yeah, when's the last time they told you that they were rolling out this new, 18-month window for rolling out a new sales enablement software? Like, you find out at the last minute, right? So don't expect that anyone's going to tell you this unless you go ask. So asking for some metrics like this, they're not hard to figure out. If you want to get into the math, you can, but probably this has been figured out in your organization. And what this does, why I'm talking about customer service and customer numbers, is if you want to be able to provide a business case, to provide a dollar number for what it is that you make, what it is that you do in relationship to numbers that the business cares about, it's going to pin on one of these things, maybe several of them. So if we've got a customer service training, a sales training, let's say it's a sales training, and we're trying to get people to learn something better, that should result in better sales numbers. And we can prove that and attach a dollar sign to it if we know what those numbers are. If we know how much money a customer is going to spend over their entire lifetime, then now we can say how much the training is worth as a percentage of improvement to that number. Make sense? And I see Luis is coming back on here.
I'm popping in because I know we're going to be wrapping up in a sec here, but I wanted to kind of go back to that, to the talking to other people piece that you were a couple slides ago, right? Because I think that that's a super relevant thing, just from my own experience working, like, say, in a marketing department. And our marketing, it's easy to come up with lots of data and analysis and measurement to prove why we need budget for marketing, right? Same thing with IT. They would show up at the table. They would have lots of stuff. Same thing with, like HR would have things, but the training department, it was like,
Yeah.
So what would happen? It's like you'd see all of this budget being allocated to these departments, but they wouldn't have so much. But the thing is like talking to them, it's like, you guys just model what we're doing.
Yeah.
Us over here in the marketing department, just like, here, check out what we're tracking, and you guys just figure out the same types of things.
So if I may, this in my big He-Man sword moment here, by the power of Matrix, you may realize this sword is a double-edged one. So here's the reason why we don't go and engage other people, is because then we're on the hook. Then we're on the hook for the results. And that's a dangerous place to be. I think the business demands that we are there. And if we don't step up to be that accountable, eventually they will get rid of us. But they haven't yet. So maybe if we just don't say anything, it'll be okay. No, it won't. And there's plenty of metrics that HR has that we need in order to show that we are valuable. And that requires talking to HR and figuring out what is the value of an employee over their lifetime. If we can decrease attrition, that has a real dollar number value. Now we are protecting the training department with the front edge of that sword by saying how much we are saving the company. It costs $5,000 to hire a new employee. Every time we hire a new employee, every turnover costs us that much. Now we have value to establish in the conversation about what it is that we're measuring and why. And if I could just get to this one last slide here, more info that you should go get. Figure out what your focus is. What is it that you want to get? Are we looking at efficiency here? Are we looking at loyalty and engagement, that kind of turnover thing? Are we really looking at something strategic? And compliance here has a role to play. Do you want to talk numbers? Talk lawsuits, talk fines, talk, you can go bankrupt over this stuff real quick. If you can link your compliance training to something like that, you will get budget. But it is a double-edged sword, and it slices both ways.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. We're at the top of the hour right now. I wanted to wrap things up. I wanted to thank you again for coming in and doing this first session of the playlist. I don't usually put these on in podcast format, the audio only format, but I'm going to drop this one in the podcast in our podcast bucket, because so much valuable information that I know people would want to listen to, a few times.
Well, good. Maybe I'll listen back myself and learn something.
There you go. You got to do that too. But I'm so glad that you were here and that you opened this up for us. I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you about this topic. Maybe we'll do something else as a follow-up. Next week, we have Megan Torrance coming in. Really looking forward to that. Let's see. I think, what day was she going to be on? Oops, my computer is not agreeing with me. October 16th. So that's Wednesday. So next Wednesday, Megan Torrance with Peace, Love, and Data Interoperability using XAPI to drive analytics with Megan Torrance. I'm sure all of you know who Megan is and how fantastic she is. So tune in next week. And with that, we will bid thee adieu. Again, Sam, thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate everybody for coming in. Susan, thanks. Good to see you. Stella, Jeff, Jane, Mark, Adam, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.